Hi, it's Ileana. So I had never really discussed in too much detail what I had seen when I had been on the moon. What I had seen on that moon, Earth's moon, that is locked to the Earth in its orbit, when I had been in the SSB, stationed on lunar space operations. They have several of their own dome-shaped gray-white bases in craters, but what's originally on the moon, especially on parts of the moon that are not regularly satellite imaged or probed, the what is called the dark side of the moon. It's not really dark, but it's called that because we do not see that aspect of the moon. It is never shown to us on any images of anything. That is because on that part of the moon, there's ancient alien bases and current alien bases that are still active there. And what these bases look like, they look like things you would never regularly see human civilizations making. Some of those bases look like combinations of towers with what looks like mushroom shaped tops for the buildings, like cities. Then there are dome shaped bases, dome shaped cities that are made in clusters, in modules. There's sphere shaped cities and bases as well. And there's tower like structures, which are cities, and those towers have spheres on top of them. And there's also large sphere shaped structures that are floating above these cities and bases and just kind of keeping an energy field over all of this stuff. It is protected by energy shielding with these huge spheres, silver-shaped spheres floating over these bases and cities and clusters of areas with these structures there. And these towers are large. They're huge. So all of this stuff has been on the moon ever since it was towed and parked in and locked in Earth orbit. That has been there since the beginning of time. And it's still there because there's civilizations on the moon other than the secret space program human bases. Extraterrestrials have always used the moon as a observatory, a research facility for studying different civilizations, observing how extraterrestrials evolve. It was always an ancient laboratory. It's been used by Andromedans, it's been used by the Zenitae, it's been used by Pleiadians, it's been used by other extraterrestrial races temporarily coming to the moon. And these structures are there because they've always been there. Humanoid extraterrestrial races lived on the moon before and still do. Just like there's bases on Mars with extraterrestrial cities on the surface of Mars and underground, the original Mars colonists didn't die off on Mars when it was hit with the nuclear weapon from Maldak. They went underground. There's also reptilian, reptiloid, and mantid beings who were there originally on Mars, living there, that are still there. This is not anything that is super new. There have always been structures of pyramids, of towers, spheres, mushroom-like structures, both on the moon and more pyramids, pyramid-like bases on Mars. It has been there since the beginning. And it's been covered up a lot in images of what NASA takes. It's scrubbed out of the footage and erased. But those buildings are there. They're still there. They're just not being shown to us in what everything looks like. But I'm showing these images because I want people to know what that stuff looks like. It's been there since the beginning, and it's still there, of what these extraterrestrial human-like civilizations have left behind on these planets. The moon and the Mars are the closest to us, and they're easy to get to with anti-gravitic crafts, which the secret space programs are using, and they've known about this stuff for a long time, about these cities, these bases of extraterrestrials on the moon and Mars. Extraterrestrials still live there, humanoid extraterrestrials. And that stuff is a reality that we're not being told about, which I think we deserve to know about, and we deserve to see what that stuff really looks like. What do extraterrestrial cities, bases look like? They're not the usual structures that we build. Again, a lot of domes, spheres, mushroom-like structures, towers. That's what Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and other astronauts did see from Apollo missions when they landed on the moon. They also saw different crafts being parked in craters, extraterrestrial crafts. Whoever says that astronauts on the Apollo missions never landed on the moon and that is all fake and filmed, astronauts did land on the moon quite a few times. Yes, some of the moon missions did fail and they didn't land all the time from the start, but some of the missions did go through successfully and they landed on the moon, and they did see things they weren't supposed to see. And that was all scrubbed out of footage as well, out of radio footage, video footage. They got to see things that we would never normally get to see because, again, that stuff is scrubbed out from footage. Or it's actually shown in the beginning, like the pyramids, the face of Mars and the pyramid structures on Mars. So the footage of the face of Mars and the pyramid-like cities on Mars were originally shown in GPL images, great clear satellite images. Then everything was scrubbed to be more fuzzy and that it's natural phenomenon, natural part of the landscape, that it's not man-made. Even though those structures are man-made, NASA denies that they are remnants of ancient civilizations that had lived on Mars millions and billions of years ago, before almost everything was wiped out with that nuclear war between Maldak reptilians, Orion War, and all that stuff. That's ancient history that we need to know about. But that stuff is real and it exists on the moon and on Mars. Joe McMoneagle had been one of the first remote viewers for the CIA Stargate program to remote view what was going on Mars several million years ago. And he had been given coordinates to look at a pyramid city where there had been tall, humanoid-looking extraterrestrials, taller than humans, like about maybe 8 feet to 10 feet tall. And they were inside this large pyramid, and they were hibernating in a stasis-like state because their civilization was the last remnants. So their civilization was the last surviving living remnants of some of the original colonists on Mars that had survived on the surface. All the others went underground. These had survived on the surface, and they literally went into stasis hibernation inside one of these large pyramids in the pyramid city, and they were waiting to be rescued, to be taken off Mars, and to be transported to another planet that had a more sustainable atmosphere with more oxygen to breathe. But unfortunately, they were starting to be dying in this stasis field hibernation state, and they weren't rescued in time. But Joe was able to see this in the CIA remote viewing, and that remote viewing can be read. It was declassified by the CIA. That particular remote viewing was declassified by the CIA in the transcript of what Joe describes seeing based on the coordinates he was given. And he didn't know that this was on Mars. He thought that a new set of pyramid cities were discovered somewhere on Earth, ancient civilization of extraterrestrials. But then he learned after the remote viewing was completed that what the target was, what he was actually looking at, those tall beings, humanoid-like beings, and the pyramids, that's on Mars several million years ago, when he was seeing these beings in the stasis, hibernation, and he connected to them, and they told him that they were the last remnants of the surviving humanoid civilization on Mars, that there had been a war, decimation, and they were just trying to survive and conserve their energy until they were rescued. That's what they were waiting for, but they were dying. They didn't have enough energy left to keep the stasis going, and they were sleeping on in these chambers in the pyramids. Each one of them had a chamber. They were lying on a slab that looked like a bed. That's what Joe saw, and they were wearing robe-like clothing, ochre, reddish-brown clothing. There was canyons on Mars, there were roads, there were cities, pyramid cities. And I had seen pyramids on Mars when I was stationed there in planetary corporations. Pyramids are normal. They exist on Mars. There's domed cities, bases, SSP bases, and domes, and other extraterrestrial domes. So all of that is indeed on Mars, and it exists. The domed cities on the moon and Mars, they contain their own living ecosystems with lakes, oceans, water, different living environments with parks, quarters for sleeping, for eating, replicators. So these types of domed cities are self-sustaining ecosystems with their own living biospheres with oxygen, everything that you need in life to live. It seems like you're living on a planet. You're just in dome environments that are eco-friendly, designed specifically for humanoid galactic habitats, both for humans, extraterrestrials, animals, different biodiversity of different nature. You can build domes that have gardens, that have food, biodiversity for growing different food, trees, plants, mushrooms, grass, and it is all within the living environment. It is all connected in a living biosphere, since these domes can support life. That's how many beings have lived on different planets that were terraformed. Mars, the moon, Venus. Venus has dome cities that some of them were destroyed by an asteroid-like strike, and Venusians went to live underground. Now they're fixing the domed cities again to return to living on the surface, to terraform Venus, Mars, back to what they were before, with fuller atmospheres, more plant life on the surface. So these dome cities are ancient, and they've been around for a very long time, since the beginning, and our solar systems were being seeded with life forms and planets were being terraformed. So that's kind of normal to see domed cities on various planets. The Venusian cities had these beautiful green and blue kind of domes on the buildings themselves. Those beautiful kind of like iridescent turquoise, green and blue, just very beautiful colors in the cities themselves, and this kind of tranquility. It was so tranquil, and they were covered by the huge domes to protect these cities on the surface of Venus. So the architecture was very distinct. Circular buildings, some towers, just very beautifully blended with the scenery of nature and the environments in the mountains and beside lakes and oceans where these cities were built. Just very harmonious architecture and very good energy and vibration to how everything was built and respected in nature and the beings living on the planet. Deep within where the core of the moon would be, it's hollowed out. So there are 4 world engines that are made out of plasmatic material and different non-destructible metallics. Those engines spin, and they can literally power the moon to travel to different orbits of planets and lock itself within planetary orbits to modify various weather, like tidal waves, how much rays of the sun come in, radiation amounts, to protect planets against asteroids and meteorites from hitting the planets directly. That's why such large moons were created. And then literally with these world engines being active, at one point the hollowed out moons would travel, because originally these moons were planetoids hollowed out. They would travel and they would be parked where they were needed to stabilize planetary cores of other planets and to control amounts of radiation, sunbursts, what comes near planet, asteroids, meteorites. The moon actually is like a tug, if you would, or a magnet that removes meteorites or asteroids from hitting the Earth, and they pelt the moon instead. So it is literally like a transporter system. So basically the moon is like a large tractor beam that acts as a shield against things hitting the Earth. That's one of the main purposes why it was parked in Earth orbit, to prevent large space debris from hitting the planet. It hits the moon instead and just bounces off. And craters are created on the moon, but it doesn't impact the moon because the moon is metallic and hollowed out. So it just bounces off the moon and does not destroy the moon. Asteroids, meteorites, and other space debris have not destroyed the moon. It's bounced off of it and protected Earth from being directly hit by the impact of massive asteroids, meteorites, and other things that can float out in space and come near a planet. and impacted. So the moon has been a shield for a very long time. Some people have said it's negative having the moon here. Some people have said it serves a purpose. It does serve a purpose. And those are some of the things to prevent radiation from directly hitting the Earth, prevent too many sun flares, too much sun activity from hitting the Earth as well, and to prevent other physical large space objects from hitting the planet as well. Those are the main purposes of why the moon is here. Plus, it's a observatory, large lab, and other things with ancient structures there, domes, mushroom-shaped structures, crystalline towers that send out vibration, balancing things in the solar system. The energy is rebalanced for a more harmonious frequency now. So that's some of the ancient technology on the moon. The moon world engines, they emit this large frequency of energy, blue and purple energy, and that surrounds the engines and powers the moon with these 4 spinning engines. So it's energy, it's metallics, non-destructible metallics for the engines where the plasma is encased inside it. There's also this kind of like an orange energy field around all of this. That's what the energy looks like, feels like, and these engines, they're huge. You would need to carve out and hollow out a whole moon to fit 4 engines, and then other underground facilities on the moon, research and development laboratories, bases inside the moon, on the surface inside, crystalline technology. That's what exists on the moon from ancient times and today.